welcome to the Lorecast, where we look into the lore and stories by which we live. I'm Dr. Craig Chalquist, and you can find us at chalquist.com/podcast and at a number of other online venues. We're going to look today at the psychology of idealization and how to get beyond it, and why we should, particularly as adults. And I want to start by mentioning a film that came out in 2011 called Kumare, and very interesting and controversial film. And in it, the director, Vikram Gandhi, decides to dress up and play the role of a traditional Indian guru, a wise man who teaches others. And he goes around in that outfit and that role for a while, long enough to collect a number of followers in Arizona who sincerely believe in him. And then at the end of the film, he reveals that he did it to prove a point to them and that he's not really a guru. And some were quite angry at being deceived, understandably. A few were amused that they had been taken in. And what I want to underline here is that this isn't just about the stereotype of the Indian wise man or guru figure, that this is worldwide. And so, case in point, I live in the United States, and we have a national pastime that's called idealizing the people on our side politically. So, for instance, when Donald Trump ran for office some years ago for president, there were some people in my families who liked him and who not only liked him, but idealized him. And he speaks for us, he's the voice of the people, he's real, and so on and so forth. And so fast forward to now, when there's a congressional panel that's uncovering all kinds of abuses of power, and people still believe in him. They discount the panel, they discount the investigation, they still believe in him. In exactly the same way that when spiritual teachers have been exposed as frauds, there's a core group of people who continue to make excuses for them. So this can happen on any side of the aisle politically. When President Biden was running for office, I heard the same thing from supporters of him. He's going to do this, he's going to do that. He hasn't done any of those things. Same thing when President Obama was elected. And in a sense, it's unfair to hold these people to such a high standard because, after all, they are playing a part in systems that have been aging and deteriorating for a number of decades. So it's unrealistic to expect that a single person who occupies a presidency or any other influential position is suddenly going to reverse everything and make it all better. So the onus really is on us to ask ourselves, why do we do that? Why do we idealize not only political figures or spiritual teachers? We idealize the religion that we belong to. We idealize the Bible or the Quran or what have you. Just about anything that matters to us can be idealized. And I'm not talking about revering something or according it a special place in one's life. Idealizing means attributing qualities to something or someone that it actually doesn't possess, favorable qualities. So you sometimes hear Christians say the Bible is the guide for mankind. Aside from the problematic gendered mankind, the Bible never has been that. It doesn't speak to huge parts of the population who are not Christians, and who may regard it instead as an interesting set of stories or some sources of ancient wisdom or what have you, but certainly don't regard it as the inviolable Word of God. The same thing with one's own church. I had a family member who was attacked by a church counselor many years ago, and when the news of that came to light, the church elders got behind the attacker, who was a youth counselor, not the person in my family. And it was only after a number of other voices came to the surface that he was finally arrested. And And the pastor was removed from his position because he was a mandated reporter of child abuse and he didn't report it. So it's important to bear in mind that what such people or institutions or books stand for is an entirely separate question from the amount of idealization they attract. The Pope and the Dalai Lama and Krishnamurti, who I'll come back to in a moment, or presidential candidates or anything that we idealize, they can be anywhere on the political spectrum, anywhere on the ethical spectrum, and they still collect our idealizations. So it really has nothing to do with what they represent. So why do we do this? I think this is a good psychology to look at developmentally. So very often, those of us who come from chaotic families where there was a lot of confusion or abuse or what have you, violence, whatever, we didn't have anyone to idealize as children. And idealization is a normal developmental phase for young kids. And it lasts different lengths of time. It depends on the child. And for some of us, it extends into early adulthood. But at that point, it starts to become problematic when we hang on to it and continue idealizing people when we get older. And so you see this a lot when you do couples counseling. There's an initial idealization of one's partner that eventually turns to disillusionment, disappointment, and sometimes even hatred. Which is why a lot of psychotherapists think that idealization is a setup for hating somebody, that you put them high up on the pedestal because unconsciously you're looking forward to knocking them off it. So one reason for idealizing is that we're still in that developmental phase where it's normal. But as I said, the problem is when we're adults, and then it starts looking very problematic. And then what we hope for is something to rupture the idealization. So if you've been a psychotherapy client, you may have had an experience more than once where you're idealizing your therapist, which is understandable. But then one day they say or do something and you have this deflating moment where you realize, they're actually a human being after all. They're not my idealized parent figure. And then you work through it with them. Hopefully they'll acknowledge it. I had a moment like that, not in therapy, but many years ago I attended a college where I had a mentor who taught me not only English, but he turned me on to all kinds of things like depth psychology and philosophy and wonderful stuff. He was just a great teacher. And so I ended up staying in touch with him, and he's probably the only guru figure I've ever had. And I idealized him. And a day came, though, when we were having lunch after I graduated from college, and he made a Freudian slip about something that revealed an attitude that I hadn't known he possessed. And to his credit, he actually got embarrassed. And he said, well, that was kind of revealing. And I could feel the transference, as they would say psychologically, the projection I had on him. I could feel it crumble. And that was a gift, because then we could have a different kind of relationship that was more reality-based. And so occasionally I still get in touch with him. Hi, how are you doing? And what are you up to? And all that. But I no longer look at him as a guru figure or a spiritual mentor or anything like that. It was time for that to end. And sometimes that's how it goes. When we're ready for it to end, then sometimes we subtly encourage maybe the other person to be a little bit more human than we expect. And then we fall out of the idealization. Something else that's going on here, though, is that we idealize sometimes because we are not in touch with the qualities that we're putting on the object of our idealization. We think that so-and-so is wise or knowing or strong or, possessed of superior vision or whatever it is, because we have fallen out of touch with those qualities in ourselves, and they have to live somewhere. So we put them on other people. And there's a really interesting slice of video with Carl Jung in it that indirectly addresses this. And he was talking about a dream that one of his patients had. And in the dream, he was this godlike figure who was holding her like a father holds a girl. And there was this wind sweeping over a field of wheat. And I can't remember exactly what Jung said about this, but the gist of it was that he was holding these qualities that she was putting on him until she could take them back herself. So he never got inflated by it. He didn't think, I really am godlike, or I really am wise, or anything like that. He realized that she was putting all that on him. And so he kind of held that in trust for her until she could take it back. Now, there's another way that this shows up that brings an expectation with it and a certain amount of entitlement. And I think of it sometimes when people say that this public figure over here should walk his talk. And they get really disappointed when that person doesn't. So, and I've been through that too. I never really did revere Krishnamurti, but I got really interested in his thought when I was younger. I think I read all of his books, and fortunately we've got some video of him, and so I watched the videos and read about him too, read what people said about him, and I kept thinking, here's a guy who walks his talk, and then it turns out that, and there's still some argument about this, but what seems to have been the case is that the whole time he was saying that he was sexless and that he didn't know anything about intimacy, he was just living a life on his own and all that, he seems to have been sleeping with a friend's wife the whole time. And I remember the feeling of disappointment I experienced when I found that out. But then I went a little further with it and I asked myself, why do I think he owed me something? Right? When we expect someone to be as good as what they're demonstrating for us, is there not a sense of entitlement in that? Is it not enough that they're giving us something that they've learned? Why do we expect more, right? I heard James Hillman get irritable with a student once about this. We were at Pacifica sitting together, and there was a student who was complaining about, well, Jung fell short this way, and Jung didn't get it over here, and Jung did this, and Jung didn't do that. And Hillman said something like, look, he gave us 20 volumes of his collected works. He gave us another probably 30 volumes that haven't even been translated into English yet. He gave us letters, seminars. He saw patients for all those years. He taught. He did all kinds of things. What more do you want from the guy? So, yes, it's disappointing when people don't hold up to their standards, but doesn't that happen to all of us? Don't we all fall short at one period or another? And isn't the real question whether we realize it and try to do better? One last thing I'll mention in connection with this idealizing psychology is that it usually brings with us a certain kind of elitism. I think about situations where somebody who's identified as some kind of a great spiritual teacher or some other kind of authority figure receives lots of special treatment. And I've seen a lot of these over the years in the course of my career, where there was this expectation that these people would be treated better than anybody else. And I always wondered about that. And the followers of such people insist on that treatment too. It's like they share the group egotism. Because egotism isn't just a quality of individuals, it also belongs to groups. We get a big ego because we're these people. We're the ones who know. We're the ones who have the treasure, who possess the wisdom, or whatever it is, right? It appeals to our narcissism. And among the more unscrupulous of these mentors or gurus or what have you is a tendency to set people up for that. And so when they recruit, they'll say things like that. Don't you want to be part of a group that really gets what's going on? Don't you want to be one of the people who are really on the path? And so that taps the egotism especially in people who have felt invisible all their lives, or who were the kind of the family shaman, the family visionary who everybody made fun of as kind of weird. People who are on the outside, and then somebody comes along, a spiritual teacher, a Donald Trump, whoever, and says, "You belong to us. You're one of us." Right? That's really powerful motivation. And the usual response is idealizing the person who offers it. That kind of recruiting is so different from thinking of the character Hawkeye in the old series MASH, where he plays a doctor in Korea during the war. And there's a character named Radar who looks up to him. He's a younger guy. And at one point, Hawkeye can't do an emergency operation on a patient because he's drunk. And that's his way of dealing with stress. He drinks a lot. And so Radar confronts him about that and says, you let me down. You let us all down. You weren't able to do this, and we had to get somebody else to operate. And I always thought Hawkeye's response was really interesting. It's been so long since I've seen this episode, I can't recall it word for word. But he basically says, "How dare you for putting that on me? I'm grappling with this completely chaotic situation, this bloody, awful situation that we're in, the best way I know how. And I don't report to you or anybody else in terms of how I do that." So I thought that was a really interesting take on this whole question of idealizing and refusing to be idealized. And so let's talk a little bit about how to move through that and get beyond it a little bit. So I mentioned earlier that sometimes it ruptures by itself, the relationship of idealizing. And, to be open to when that happens is one way of dealing with this, instead of making excuses for the person who fell short, right? So that's one thing we can do. When my old mentor made that Freudian slip, I could have tried to preserve my idealizing relationship with him and said, oh, that was some weird power that possessed him momentarily, or he had brain fade. He's a busy guy helping others, or something like that. But I didn't do that. I just went, oh, he's human. He's human like the rest of us, right? So sometimes it happens spontaneously, but there's some things that you can do to outgrow the idealization if you're motivated to. And I hope you are, because what you put on other people by way of idealization is what you should be living. It's the wisdom or the strength or the knowledge or the assertiveness or whatever it is that you're out of touch with and that you're insisting other people carry for you. Why don't you carry it? Why don't you get into it? So if you're interested in doing that, a question to ask right off the bat is that when there's a figure in your life that you really look up to, a spiritual teacher, you can't say the Dalai Lama's name without putting titles on it, or the popes, or anybody else, right? Or your local spiritual teacher, or a political candidate, whoever it is, right? You locate something that you revere, and then you ask yourself the hard but fruitful question: what are the qualities I put on this, and where do they live in me? Where's my wisdom? Where's my strength of will? You see this a lot in families and in romantic relationships, where one person says about the other, well, they have all the strength in the family, or they're the hero in the family, or they're the wise leader in the family. And when I did family therapy, I would almost always ask, well, have you ever held that role yourself? And if you didn't, why not? If you think about it, we wouldn't recognize those fine qualities in other people if we didn't have them. So why not own them? Why not actualize them? They may be present as latent possibilities. They may not be fully developed. It could be that we see them in other people because those other people have developed those qualities, but why can't we? What's holding us back? So the beginning of the inquiry can be exactly what qualities specifically do I put on this person, whether or not they actually have them, and where are those qualities in me? And then to do a real inventory. These are the times in my life when I've been brave. These are the times when I've been insightful or creative or whatever it is that I'm putting on other people. And the more you do that, the more you realize that you actually have those qualities, that you own them. And the more you do that, the less inclined you're going to be to put them elsewhere. So to continue the inquiry, the next step would be something along the lines of, how can I develop these more in myself? So let me use a specific example. I used to idealize, not to the full-on state of this is my guru, master, or whatever, but I used to idealize a little bit and admire people who are really great at public speaking. I still do. I love it when someone can stand up in front of hundreds of people and just be really eloquent and really heartfelt. I think that's an amazing talent. And I grew up in such a way that I was put out of alignment with any possibility of that in me until I guess I reached grad school. I think that's when I started to develop it, mainly because I had to. And I still don't consider myself in any way a great public speaker, but I do enjoy it. And I have got past the fear of it. So I notice now that when I look at other people whom I do consider great public speakers, it frees me to enjoy their performance, because it is a performance, really, and to admire things that they do and connections they make. And I still learn from them. I still see things that I think, wow, I want to try that out and see if that works for me, you know. But I don't idealize those people anymore, because I know that I have at least a little bit of what they can do. Even if I have not yet fully cured myself from saying, you know. Another part of the inquiry, the question, why am I afraid of my own shine? Why am I afraid that I too might have at least some wisdom or some knowledge or some strength, creativity, whatever it is that I'm putting on other people? Who taught me that it was dangerous to have those things? You know, it's even more confusing because we do live in a culture that, many of us, that supports narcissism. You see it in social media all the time. You can scarcely watch a video and not see somebody grooming themselves on it, and preening themselves. But we don't have to be that way. You know, if you've got a talent that you can develop or a knack for something that you can be really good at, it doesn't mean that you have to get egotistical about it. So it could be that your inner guardian or inner critic is doing unpaid work full time and they need to relax a little bit. So there's a possibility too, that you're trying to prevent yourself from an egotism that actually you're not really in much danger of having. So I notice this a lot with in the academic world with some of my students who are more afraid of getting inflated than they are of being in such a state of deflation that they never come to voice. So doing your internal homework on all that, who taught me that I couldn't shine? Who taught me that I was ineffective and that I couldn't have a leadership position, or that I couldn't speak my own truth? And why am I still obeying those edicts internally? What will it take for me to realize that they're outworn and I don't need them anymore, if they ever even did serve a useful purpose? Back in my therapy days, which were some time ago, I would sometimes ask my clients who wrestled with this, you know, this attitude that you have, this particular attitude, is it empowering or disempowering you right now? So that's a good inquiry to do. I think it's also necessary to recognize that there's a certain amount of fear in not idealizing people or institutes or structures or belief systems that you're used to idealizing. Because then what? If you see through them, if you don't need them anymore, then what are you going to do? And it can be a scary question. What happens if you have made an entire way of life or an entire group of people into sort of your internal judge of how you're living your life, and one day you realize that there is no judge except the one that you yourself created, that there is no courtroom, that it's up to you to make the meaning. I think that if a lot of people realize that, most of our institutes that have outworn their usefulness would collapse overnight. A lot of things in our world are built to keep us under control, and one of the ways they do that is by convincing us that we need them a lot more than we actually do, when the reality of it is, without us, they crumble. Some years ago, a Jungian analyst approached me about the possibility of teaching Gnosticism, an old esoteric path full of psychological wisdom, to some of his analyst candidates. And he wasn't able to get me cleared as a teacher at the Institute because I was not formally a member of their organization. This is what I mean by, with idealization, there comes this exclusivity, right? Which in the Jungian world is rampant. Not everywhere, but rampant. And so he had to pay me out of his own pocket to teach the candidates kind of on the side. It was totally ridiculous. And so at the beginning of my teaching session, I told them Jung had a limited view of Gnosticism, inevitably, because there were Gnostic texts that he never read that we now have. And so we have a fuller picture of what they were about. And I told them, I do not idealize Jung the way perhaps you do. I have actually used the book, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, as a doorstop on a windy day. I think it does very little credit to the people who have taught us so much wonderful stuff to continue freezing them into the picture of the can do no wrong teacher who stands above all of us. And so you're going to get me critical of Jung. That's the version of me you're going to get sometimes. And you're just going to have to live with it and take it as it comes. So Jung himself, by the way, said, according to Barbara Hanna, he said, "Thank God I'm young and not a Jungian," because he didn't like this kind of clannishness and this elitism. And so this is an embarrassing thing for your guru to say. And, there are analysts who have gone public saying we should put a moratorium on this entire quotation. And they don't get the irony of that. They don't get that they want to suppress conversation in a way that Jung himself surely would have disapproved of. So they're backing the very idealization that they say that they're aware of. Because idealizations always reinforce themselves by repressing dissent. That's how you know one of them's operating. When the revered figure is argued with or disagreed with, then the idealizers get pissed off. But how much freer it can be, how much more liberating to learn from these teachers of humanity wherever they show up. Sometimes they're known in public and sometimes nobody knows who they are. And to come away with whatever wisdom we get from them, not with an urge to see them as all knowing or infallible, but to realize that they're human beings who stretched a little bit and gave us something precious as a result of becoming momentarily a little bit taller than they would have been otherwise. It seems to me that kind of an attitude, that kind of gratitude, does more justice to what they left us than continuing to make them into some idol that they themselves wouldn't have felt comfortable with. So to wrap up, maybe I can suggest that what this path looks like when we choose to take it is that we move from idealization to living our ideals. From idealization to living our ideals. And in that way, we pay the best tribute we can to the people who have given us so much. Thank you.